We'll start with a question. Where do you go looking for God, if you like that word? The voice of conscience, if you prefer that word. A sense of connection to something bigger, if you prefer that. The holy, that's a good catch-all. Where do you go looking for that, which is beyond us? Where do you go looking? Let's see some hands. Where do you go looking? Yeah. The beach. If God is real, she sounds like waves. I believe it. I absolutely believe it. The beach is a place to go to feel close. With people or by yourself? Either way. Thank you. Where do you go to feel close to the holy? Where do you go, Devorah? In front of the Shabbat candles. By yourself, with your family, with a family around you. Where do you go to feel the holy? Where do you go, Michelle? Sunday supper. Michelle, who co-coordinates with Mindy, our Sunday supper monthly homeless feeding program, you go to feel God in the act of being of service. Beautiful. And it should be a shameless plug. Everybody should participate. Nancy, where do you go to feel God?
Anywhere where there are big trees.
Big trees in the forest. There is nothing like being in the redwoods in particular, right? There are lots of big trees, but in the silence of the redwoods, God lives there, for sure. Yeah, Rachel. Inside. You turn inside in meditation, in prayer, in quiet moments. Where do you go to find God? Does anybody come here? Am I out of a job? Jeez. Where do you go? The beach, the forest, my house. Chopped liver. I know people come here looking for something. I don't know if they're coming here looking for their buddy. I don't know if they're coming here looking for, well, it's not a day off work, it's a weekend, and you gave up the whole weekend. But I know that yesterday, there was not a seat going all the way back. And on Kol Nidre, it's going to be the same or more. And today, it's the family. But people come here in significant numbers to find something. And people also go to the beach. And people also go to the forest. And people also go to their candles. And people also go to do goodness out in the world. And people also turn inside. It turns out there are a lot of roads up the mountain. And that's good. There's a lot of ways to get there. I hope this is one of them. But there are a lot of ways to get there. The Bible, people forget, is not one book by one author. Even if you believe the Torah came entirely from God, 5 books dropped out of heaven by the hand of Moshe, our Bible has a book 6 and 7 and 8, 9 and 10 and 11 and up into the 30s. There are a lot of books in the Hebrew Bible, and they're not all written by one person or one being. And because they were Jews who wrote these books, the books often don't agree with each other. Because how would it be if a group of Jews all wrote books that all agreed with each other, especially on the big questions? These books don't all agree with each other on where you're to go to find God. The whole purpose, perhaps, of the Bible is to teach us how to get closer to God, but they lay out many different paths up the mountain. And sometimes the authors of these different books, they speak to one another. They even argue with one another. Can you imagine Jews arguing? They argue with one another. And they say, no, you didn't get it right. This is the path up the mountain. This is the way. And what they do is they bequeath us a treasure trove of possible maps to follow. And so I want to look together at one of my very favorite Jewish texts. This is a text that I have taught many, many times. This is a text which has been taught already over the course of this year. Dr. Ahuva Ho actually taught about this text just a few weeks ago. But I want to come back to it this year with a specific purpose, to think about the many different ways that our tradition offers us to make our way up the mountain. I'm on the side of the page that has on the bottom Rosh Hashanah Day 2. So that's the front. When King Ahab told the queen Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he'd put her prophets to the sword, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, "This and more may the gods do to me if by this time tomorrow I have not made you like one of them." Scene, we are in ancient Israel about the year 800 BCE. Elijah is a prophet that we know from his visiting our Seder tables and getting a little shikker while he's there, visiting our brisses and holding the babies for a moment that we invoke at Havdalah. Anytime we want to imagine the coming of a new and better world, we invite Elijah to come and be with us. But he was a real-life guy who lived 2,800 years ago. And he was not on good terms with the government. The government at that time, King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, her name has come down to us as not a good word. It's not a nice word. Nobody calls somebody an Ahab. People call people a Jezebel. That's misogyny. There we go. But they're not good people, either of them. And Elijah has just killed off 400 of Queen Jezebel's personal prophets. She has personal prophets. That is something that no politician yet has tried, though you never know. Come the next administration, maybe there'll be personal prophets. Personal prophets. And he's killed them all off, and Jezebel says to Elijah, "I'm going to do the same thing to you." And Elijah boldly goes forward to confront Jezebel about her evil ways. No, Elijah is frightened and he runs for his life. Elijah, who challenged and killed hundreds of her idolatrous priests, when he finds out that she's coming after him, which is of course entirely predictable, runs in the other direction. We have a long history, by the way, of biblical figures doing this, right? Moses kills an Egyptian and then boldly leads a revolution against Pharaoh. No, he kills an Egyptian and gets the heck out of town. For 20 years, he raises a family until God has to go and practically drag him back to do his destiny. Jonah winds up inside a fish. We have a whole tradition of people running away when there is a big moment and being sent back. I'm going to read to you the next few lines. And what I want you to hear in them is a recap of biblical history. Because this is a biblical author who is telling us that the early biblical books didn't quite get it right. And it's doing it by means of literary echo. One of my teachers, Rabbi Sean Fieldsmeyer, says the Torah is an echo chamber. Every word in the Torah has an echo that carries us somewhere, that carries us to all the other parts of the Torah. And so when we hear certain place names or certain words, we are supposed to go ding, ding, ding. That carries me somewhere else. So I want us to listen for the echoes and see if you catch some of them. Frightened, he fled for his life. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah, and he left his servant there. And he went himself a day's journey into the wilderness. And he came to a bush, and he sat down under it and prayed that he might die. "Enough," he cried. "Now God, take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors." And he lay down and fell asleep under a bush. How many echoes can you count? We're not all biblical scholars. That's okay. You got a whole lot of other day jobs. I appreciate that, you have those day jobs so I can have my job. But some of these are right there. What echoes did you catch? Beersheba. We were just talking about Beersheba. Beersheba, a very significant location for the story of Abraham, for the story of Abraham. We heard about Beersheba and a treaty being made at Beersheba yesterday at the end of the Torah reading. We hear about Beersheba as the place connected to the Akedah today. Beersheba, the 7 wells, is the place that Isaac will go back to and redig the wells of his father, always understood to be a metaphor that in every generation we need to go find our own living waters in the place that our ancestors looked, but we need to find them for ourselves. Beersheba takes us all the way back to the beginning. Any other echoes? A bush that could be a burning bush, a place where God comes to talk to you. Any other bushes we can think of that echo for us? What? Hagar. Hagar. There is a very interesting strain here of Hagar language. It's on the top of your sheet. And Hagar wandered in the wilderness of? Thank you very much. And when the water was gone from the skin, she left the child, that's Ishmael, under one of the bushes and went and sat down in a distance, for she thought, let me not look on the child as he dies. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like Elijah? Out into the wilderness, Beersheba, sitting down under a bush, waiting to die. So we're back to the beginning. We're back to Abraham and Beersheba. We're back to Hagar, wandering out in the desert. Hagar, whose name literally means Hagar, the stranger, the lost one. It's a bush at the end of the Akedah story too, isn't it? The ram caught in the bush, the alternative sacrifice at Mount Moriah, the place where God provides vision. He falls asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat, and he looked about, and there beside his head was a cake and a jar of water. You may have caught this yesterday in the Torah reading. When Hagar is laying there in her distress and the angel comes to her, the angel doesn't create a well. What does the angel do? The angel opens her eyes, and she sees the well which had been in front of her the whole time. Rabbis like to drash on this one. The idea that we are often in such distress, we are so much in ourselves that we can't see the life-giving source that's literally in front of our eyes. That the miracle isn't necessarily God coming and changing the laws of nature. The miracle is God coming to wake us up so that we can find that we had everything we needed to begin with. And a similar miracle happens for Elijah. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel came a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, or the journey will be too much for you. And he arose and he ate and drank. By the way, a friend of mine said, this is just proof that when you're having a bad day, what you really need is a snack and a nap. True, right? A snack and a nap and you're better. I'm always better. With his strength of that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights. Sound like anybody? 40 days and 40 nights takes us to Sinai. Thank you. To the mountain of God at Horeb, which is an alternative name for Sinai. So Elijah had been a character who was sending us back to the beginning, to Abraham and Hagar and Yitzchak, to the start of the story. And now Elijah is sending us back to Moses. 40 years in the desert, 40 days on the mountain. He has come to Mount Sinai, the place of the original covenant. And there he went into a cave. We are told that Moses on top of Mount Sinai asked to see God's glory, and God places him in a cleft in the rock and passes by and says, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. No, you don't need to sing it. The cantor needs to sing it. Certainly I don't need to sing it. But that's now the image. Now we have gone from the beginning to we have gone to the next key incident. We have gone to Mount Sinai. We have replayed Jewish history in the start of the story. It's very, very intentional. And then God comes to Elijah and says, what are you doing here? By the way, when the angel comes to Hagar, the angel says, Ma lach, Hagar. What's with you, Hagar? Malach is malach, which is angel. It's a pun. What's with you? Here it is. What's with you, Elijah? It's the same question. So Elijah's been everybody. He's been Abraham. He's been Hagar. He's been Moses. He's been the whole Jewish history. Turn the page. And the word of God says, why are you here, Elijah? And he replies, I am moved by zeal for Adonai, the God of hosts, for Israel has forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they have come to take my life. Drama, drama, drama. Elijah says, I'm the only one left, and this is an echo of Pinchas, and we talked about this if you were in Shul on the Shabbos morning a few months ago. Pinchas, a character driven by zeal to engage in an act of personal violence that he sees as the only way to protect the Jewish future. Elijah becomes Pinchas in this moment, full of zeal. Come out, God called, and stand on the mountain. I got something to say to you. V'ya'avor Adonai el panav, and God passed before him. Same language as when God passes before Moses in the cleft of the rock. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by Adonai's power, but Adonai was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but Adonai was not in the earthquake, and after the earthquake, a fire, but Adonai was not in the fire. And after the fire, kol demama daka. And how do we translate kol demama daka? Most often as the still small voice, the voice of fine silence, the sound of silence, according to Rabbi Paul Simon. This is the barest hint of a voice, the little teeny tiny voice of conscience inside your heart, the little voice that peeks out at the beach, in the waves, in the murmur of the waves, in the forest, in the stillness of the forest, in the moment in front of your Shabbos candles, or in the moment that you hand somebody a hot meal. This is the little voice. And at that moment, Elijah comes forward and God asks again, "What's with you, Elijah?" And the story continues, but that literary structure, that beginning with a question, "Why are you here?" and that ending, "Why are you here?" tells you it's called an inclusio. It tells you that this is a unit, that everything that comes afterwards is commentary. But what they want you to get is they want you to get this. They want you to get that there is an alternative to the way that we were conditioned by the early part of the Bible to think that we find God. Because the early part of the Bible tells us that we find God when it's loud. We find God when water turns to blood and frogs come onto the land and a deep darkness descends. In order to connect with God, we need to leave everything we've ever known in our homeland and go on a journey to somewhere entirely new and there be prepared to give up our children. That in order to find God, you have to be somebody very, very special, one of the chosen family. That in order to find God, you're going to experience a scene like this one. On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud blast of the horn, and all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their place at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for God had come down upon it in fire, and the smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently, and the blare of the horn grew louder and louder, and Moses spoke, and God answered in thunder. This is Cecil B. DeMille stuff. This is Bruckheimer stuff. This is CGI on top of CGI. This is big and loud. The mountain is on fire. Grace is obsessed with volcanoes. I'm not entirely sure why. She asks about volcanoes all the time. And what would happen if there was a volcano, and what would happen if there was magma, and would you be mad if I touched it? And the answer is yes. And she'd say it would really hurt, and I'd say it would really hurt, so you should never touch the magma. And she says, I don't want to go anywhere where there's a volcano. And then she asked me about volcanoes again the next day. There was a real appeal to small children about volcanoes. Anyway, that's an aside. This mountain is being a volcano. It's exploding. It's smoking. And the sound of the shofar is blasting louder and louder and louder, and the people are trembling, and God speaks in thunder. You know what the Midrash says happens next? Everyone dies. That's the Midrash. God speaks from the mountain, and everyone dies immediately upon hearing it, and God looks down and says, whoops. Whoops. Didn't mean to do that. Had to revive the whole people and just give the commandments to Moses. That's what the Midrash says happens here. And honestly, I get it. If I was standing at the base of an exploding mountain with flashing lights and thunderstorms and shofar blasts and thunder, I might keel over from a coronary on the spot without anything spiritual going on. We are acculturated by the first books of the Bible to look for God in the loud. And I think that acculturation doesn't entirely go away. that we think that if God is going to show up, it's going to be a mountain moment. If God is going to show up, it's going to be in a burning bush. If God is going to show up, it's going to be in a voice from heaven. If God's going to show up, it's going to happen on those days of the year when the sanctuary is most packed and it is most noisy. And that's one way to find God. It is one legitimate way to find God in the spectacular and in the big and in the beautiful and in the crowded. Some of the most powerful spiritual experiences I've ever had have been with my dad at concerts, specifically Bruce Springsteen concerts. Right, when the stadium is full of all of those people, tens of thousands of people singing, the lights flash on and it's Badlands. There's God in that room. And Bruce Springsteen, and it may be the same person. There's something extraordinary about the big and the loud. But it's telling to me also that when I asked you where you find God, most people talked about the quiet. Most people talked about the places where they were surrounded, maybe only by their family and closest friends, maybe where they were alone, and they could hear something that they couldn't otherwise hear. You know, the rabbis say that the miracle at Sinai wasn't that it got so loud we could hear God, but it's that for one moment it got so quiet that we could hear God. Isn't that a beautiful midrash? That it wasn't that it got so loud, it was for 1 minute, not a bird chirped, not a baby cried. Babies are always welcome in here to make whatever noise they need to make. It's all holy. But for one moment, there was no sound, and the still small voice that had been there all along was audible. And so if you find connection in the big crowd, and in the big moments, and in the big peak experiences, Mazel Tov, you've got good biblical background to do that. And if you find that you need quiet, that you need stillness, that you need to turn inward, that you need to connect with your breath and listen for the still small voice, the author of the book of Kings wants to let you know that that's kosher too. And the thing is we don't actually need to look for it in two different places. Because at its very best, a Jewish worship service is a symphony of sound and silence. At its very best, a Jewish worship service is a room full of song, blending together, magnifying one another's voices, peak experiences that take place in this room. Baby namings and weddings, funerals and memorials, peak experiences. And then in between, there are quiet moments. Did you hear it during the shofar service? There was a loud sound of the shofar, and then there was a pause. And there wasn't a sound. And then a loud sound, and then a pause. And God was in the loud sound, and God was in the silence too. That's what the Hasidic mystics call the black letters and the white spaces. The black letters written on the page, and the white spaces that hold them, where God hides in the margins. The point is this: there's a lot of ways up the mountain. There's a lot of ways up the mountain, and the invitation of Jewish growth, the invitation of Jewish spirituality, the invitation of the work we do together is to not just pick one, but to try many, to see which paths lead us there, make us feel more whole, more connected, and more at peace. Shana Tova.